Okay, guys, so this is definitely, I think, the longest thing I wrote. I'm trying to remember what was the other one 20 pages? I didn't think it was that long. Maybe it was. One was 14. Maybe it was 24 pages or 29 pages. Okay, so this one's 20 pages. This is called Footprints Along the Shores of Moonlight Bay. This is another thing that I wrote that I never finished that's been sitting on my computer since December 9th, 2007. So this was my junior year of college that I wrote this. Okay, here we go, guys. All right, chapter 1, Evelyn. Death is confusing at no matter what age. Your head becomes clouded with so many questions that you'll probably never learn the answers to. Why did they have to die? Where do you go when you die? Did they do something wrong? However, I think death is even more confusing to a 5-year-old, not to mention more painful and traumatic. Evelyn's dad asked her to put on a black dress and come downstairs for breakfast. It had been exactly 1 week since the accident, and two had been left numb. Staring at her pale white skin and faded rosy cheeks in the mirror wearing that black dress made Evelyn shudder. Today was the day of the funeral, and Evelyn had yet to find out what a funeral was exactly. All she knew was that everyone had to wear black and that it was something sad, but she wasn't sure why yet. Picking at her plate of eggs and pancakes, she looked over at her dad. Her face was pale, her rosy cheeks faded as well. The twinkle in his brown eyes was covered by a faint mist and a sore looking redness. He'd been crying for a whole week and he hadn't slept well either. It was then, for the first time in a week, that her dad broke his zombie trance and remembered how to smile. It wasn't a very convincing smile, but a smile nonetheless. He placed a fidgety hand on her shoulder, brushed her hair behind her ears, and said, "How's breakfast, Evie?" She mirrored his half smile and nodded in approval. "Dad," she asked, "is Mom going to be at the funeral?" Her father paused for a moment. His face grew pale once more, and his half smile drooped into a definite frown. After taking another bite, delaying his answer, he finally offered her some sort of response. "Well, of course, sweetie," he half smiled. "She'll be waiting for us there." Evelyn's rosy cheeks beamed brightly and a smile stretched across her face. It wasn't too unusual for her mom to disappear for a day or two, but she had been gone for a whole week. The last time she remembered her mom leaving was when Evelyn was 3. She had heard her parents fighting during the night from the vent between her bedroom and the living room. She couldn't sleep, and when she was just about to doze back down to dreamland, she heard the back door slam shut. Evelyn Evelyn jumped up from her bedroom and ran into the room where her parents had been fighting. She heard her mom's car start up and watched from the window as the headlights backed down the driveway and sped down the dark street. Looking up at her dad was the same expression he wore on his face today, as if he had just been crying. Her parents fought a lot, but she didn't remember them having a fight on the last day she saw her mom. So she was confused as to where she had been all week. On the car ride over, Evie stared at the snow-covered town on the other side of the window. She began thinking about the accident from a week ago. A whole week had gone by of trying to forget that particular accident, but for whatever reason, it came back now on her way to the funeral. It was Sunday morning, and her mom had just dropped her off at Sunday school. She remembered a great big hug, a kiss on the nose, and a wink as her mom turned down the hall, her curly brown hair bouncing around her face. Evie loved her mother's hair. It was so soft and fun to twirl, her favorite thing to do when her mom would read to her. The day went on just as any other day at Sunday school until pickup time. One by one, everyone's mom or dad came, everyone's except for Evie's. The teacher called her dad, and he had said he was on his way to the hospital and that Grandpa would be picking Evie up from Sunday school. When Grandpa got there, his face was all blotchy, eyes misty, but he forced a smile for his granddaughter. Evie remembered being so frightened and wanting to cry. Grandpa explained to her that they were going to meet Mommy and Daddy at the hospital and that Mommy had been in a car accident, but that everything was going to be just fine. When they reached the lobby, they found Evie's dad sitting in a chair with his head collapsed in his hands, elbows resting on his knees, sobbing loudly. Grandpa looked down at Evie and said, "Sweetie, why don't you go give your daddy a hug? He really needs one right now." Evie looked curious and uncomfortably up at her grandpa and then at her dad. She remembered knowing, even at such a young age, that everything was definitely not all right and that her whole world was about to take a drastic change. It was then that they pulled up to the church and Evie felt a little faint. Daddy, she began with tears in her eyes. Mommy isn't going to be at the funeral, is she? Taking the keys out of the ignition, her dad turned to his daughter and said that the very thing he had been avoiding all week. She will be, sweetie, just not the way you would hope. He continued with a heavy heart. Do you remember the accident that happened last Sunday? Evie nodded and then sniffed. Well, when she was on her way home after dropping you off at Sunday school, it was snowing a lot, and the roads were very slippery and dangerous. He proceeded, and even though Mommy is a very careful driver, she couldn't see the semi-truck that was driving onto her side of the road and coming straight towards her. The semi-truck driver couldn't see her either because it was so snowy outside. And then he took a deep breath and fought back his tears as he continued. Both cars crashed into each other, and because Mommy's car was so little compared to the semi-truck, Mommy's car flipped over and landed on its roof. The tears began pouring out despite his efforts as he pressed on. And do you remember how in Mommy's car her seatbelt always got stuck, so she never wore it? Tears flooding down her face, Evie nodded. Well, she flipped with the car and hurt herself really bad. So bad that she had to go to the hospital, which is why I was there and Grandpa had to pick you up from Sunday school. He stopped briefly to wipe the tears off his face and then proceeded. When you got there, I had already been there for half an hour or so and had just found out that your mommy didn't make it. The doctors tried so hard to save her, but nothing worked and she didn't survive. Evie's dad looked over at his 5-year-old hugging her knees and slowly rocking herself back and forth on the passenger seat. He pulled her close to him and wrapped his arms around her small body. Do you understand what I'm telling you, sweetie? Evie nodded and managed to squeak out a response. Mommy's dead, isn't she? Like our old dog Tucker, right? She's not coming back ever. Ever again. Already knowing the answer, she beat her fist hard against his chest, and her father pulled her close and rocked her softly until she calmed down. The two sat like that for about 15 minutes, and then Evie remembered something. Daddy, does Casper know? Her father tilted her chin up towards him. Your brother is only 2 years old, honey. He doesn't understand like you do. One day we'll explain it to him, but I'm counting on you to help me remember Mommy so that we can tell him everything about Mommy one day. Can you do that for me, Evie? She nodded and hugged him while wiping her tears onto his coat. Do you think she knows that I'm sorry and that I won't ever go to Sunday school again? She cried. Do you think she knows that I love her as big as the sky? A tear trickled down her dad's face. Do you think Mommy's accident was your fault? Oh, Evie, what happened to your mom has nothing to do with you. Do you understand? Evie nodded. The accident was the seatbelt's fault, and your mom's for not wearing it, and mine for not getting it fixed, and the semi-truck driver's for not seeing her, and your mom's for not seeing him, and Wisconsin's weather for being so crummy. He hugged Evie and kissed her forehead. Your mom's death was an accident, and I don't want you to ever think that it was your fault. Okay, sweetie? Evie nodded again. All right, now let's go see your mom one last time, huh? Evie half smiled and wiped off her face. Then she took her dad's hand and they shuffled through the snow and into the little Lutheran church. Seeing her mom in that casket made Evie want to climb in with her. She looked up at her dad as he wiped a few tears from his cheeks. When he noticed her eyes looking up at him, he grasped her hand firmly and escorted her to the pews in the front row. The pastor talked on and on, but all Evie could do was stare at the casket, the flowers, the bulletin board with pictures of her mom on it. She tugged at her dad's sleeve and he leaned down to listen. Can we take those pictures home, Daddy? She pointed to the bulletin board by the casket and the flowers. Her dad smiled and nodded. When the funeral was over, Evie suddenly was filled with questions on the ride home. Why were there so many people there? Why was everybody wearing black? If Mommy's going to heaven, then why was everybody so sad? Who were all those people? Did they all know Mommy? How come Casper wasn't there? Where is Casper? Are we picking Casper up from Grandpa's? Does he have butterscotches? When is summertime? Do I start first grade next year? One by one, her dad answered each and every question on the ride to Grandpa's, but she still had one last question. Daddy, what are they going to do with the casket that Mommy was in? Her dad, exhausted from all the talking so soon after his wife's funeral, tried to muster up enough strength for this one last question. When springtime comes and the ground is softened, they're going to bury Mommy's casket underneath that willow tree in the center of the beach on Moonlight Bay, the one that's a few houses down from ours. Your mom and I met there. Really? Evie exclaimed. How? Well, you know how your mom teaches dance classes? Evie nodded. Well, she used to practice underneath that willow tree overlooking Moonlight Bay. She loved that spot. And Tucker and I were on our way to go fishing at that same spot. And when I saw your mom, I thought I died because she looked just like an angel in that white sundress dancing beneath the willow branches by the peaceful water. After that, we dated, fell in love, and got married. Evie's eyes sparkled as she heard the story, picturing her mom dancing just as her dad described. Maybe I'll be a dancer like mom and meet my husband by that tree, she smiled. Her dad laughed. Maybe, but let's get you in some dance classes. And how about we wait on the husband part for about 50 years? He winked and she laughed too. It felt good to laugh after the week they both had. As they drove on, their hearts were filled with hope and their faith strengthened. Right? Because apparently I didn't know how to spell there and then I accidentally deleted something. Okay. Maybe everything would be all right. The following week at Sunday school, Evie was on edge all day. She was in a daze and kept reliving her terrors of the previous week, fearing that she might lose her dad next. Fortunately, her nightmarish distraction was broken by a little freckled faced, blonde haired boy with enchanting hazel eyes playing with toy cars. Chapter 2. Spencer. Spencer loved playing with toy cars at Sunday school more than he loved coloring, but he loved that too. Free time was the best time ever, he thought. As he was driving around the toy car, he noticed this little girl with rosy cheeks and curly brown hair. Her brown eyes were misty, and she looked scared ever since she came into the classroom this morning. He tried to cheer her up. He began frantically looking around for a truck so he could show her his favorite thing to do with toy trucks. Once he found the object he had been seeking, he crawled, driving both cars on the ground towards the spot where she was seated. Once he had her attention, he stretched his arms as far apart as he could with the car in one hand and the semi truck in the other. He started making car revving noises and kept checking to make sure that she was watching. He then started to push both of his hands toward each other, the two cars creeping closer and closer, and then finally, crash! She screamed in excitement. To his surprise, the sad little girl grew angry and leaped out of her chair, knocking him to the ground, leaving them both breathless and confused. Her rosy cheeks grew even redder, and her tiny fist rushed violently at his face. While he tried to dodge her with his arms, he screamed out for help. Finally, the teacher came and pulled the little girl off. She suddenly began crying, and to his surprise again, the teacher hugged her. Spencer was shocked and confused as to why this girl's inexcusable behavior was being rewarded. The teacher took the girl outside of the room and came back a few minutes later, escorting Spencer outside as well. Spencer, I need to talk to you, she said. Evelyn, the little girl who was hitting you, is going through a difficult time right now. I'm sorry for what she did to you. She has agreed to apologize to you also, but I thought I would talk to you first just so you understand. Why was she so mean to me? Spencer asked. I was only trying to make her laugh because she looked sad, the teacher smiled. That was very sweet of you, Spencer, she said softly. Unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, Evelyn's mother was in a car accident. This is genius, you guys. A semi truck crashed into Evelyn's mother's car, and she didn't survive. Evelyn went to her funeral last week. Do you understand what I'm saying, Spencer? Spencer nodded. So her mom is dead and I made her sad because I made my toy cars crash? The teacher nodded. You didn't know, and she understands that now. She's just hurting is all. Spencer nodded. Just then, Evie came out of the girls' bathroom and walked towards them. She walked right up to Spencer and put her arms around him. I'm so sorry I hit you, she wailed. Spencer looked at the teacher and was a little confused. The teacher smiled and went into the classroom, leaving the two children to resolve the conflict out in the hallway. Evie let go of Spencer and wiped the tears off her face. That's okay. I'm sorry I made you mad. I was trying to make you laugh. I didn't know about your mom. I promise. I'm really sorry. Spencer said as he hugged her back. Evie smiled. Thanks. Do you want to play a different game with me? She asked. Sure, what is it? Spencer said. They both went back into the classroom and played with the blocks until their parents came to pick them up. Spencer watched Evie run to her father and hugged him tight. As he walked past her to greet his mom, he heard a conversation between Evie and her dad. I was afraid you weren't going to come, she whispered. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm safe and sound in your arms. Her dad smiled and kissed her cheek. Spencer hugged his mom and pulled her arm as he walked over to Evie and her dad. Mom, this is my new friend, Evie. Well, hello, Evie. It's nice to meet you. Spencer's mom smiled and shook her hand, then introduced herself to Evie's dad. Spencer and Evie started chasing each other around their parents' legs, and then Spencer heard the end of a conversation between his mom and Evie's dad. Really? You live on the other side of Moonlight Bay? Well, we should plan a play date for the kids then. Here's my card. Spencer's mom exchanged business cards with Evie's dad, and then they walked out to their cars together. See you next time, Spencer said as he waved and hopped into his mom's minivan. Bye, Evie waved and smiled out at her dad's SUV's window. I'm really glad that you made friends with that little girl, Spence, his mom said with a sweet smile. I read about her mom's funeral in the church bulletin. She could really use a friend right now. I really like her. We played blocks, and she's very nice to me, Spence said, still waving out the window at Evie in the SUV. I think we're going to be best friends someday. Chapter 3, First Grade. Evie opened the screen door and stepped out onto the porch, overlooking the beach. The breeze surrounded her, wiping her curly brown hair around her face and then landing gently along her mid-back. She flipped off her sandals and raced down the beach, sandy footprints trailing behind her path. As she approached her mother's tree, she began to slow down, her warm smile creeping into a cold frown. She began walking up the beach and climbing over the rocks, her body in a trance, being pulled toward the tree without really wanting to be there right then. She felt the cool grass tickle her bare feet, the tall tree towering over her, its grassy leaves breezing up against her back, almost pushing her close to its trunk. She ran her hand along the tree bark, shivers running up her spine and goosebumps popping out of her arms, each hair standing up towards the branches. She dropped to her knees, placing her tiny hands on its roots, wishing she could live within the same soil that held her mother's body. It had been well over a year since she left Evie's side. It was now the summer after her first grade year, yet before her year in second grade. Her fingers trembled as she pushed them into the dirt, patches of grass blowing off to the side. Every day was the same. She would run along the beach, feeling as free as a bird, thinking today will be different. I think I'm finally better. But then once she reached her mother's tree, everything would fall apart. She'd beat the ground with her tiny fists, shouting, "Why did you do this to me? Why did you have to leave us?" Her eyes filled with tears, she curled up beside the tree, hoping it would manage to squeak out an answer or that her mother would magically pull herself up out of the roots and everything would go back to being normal. Today, however, she received a response. Evie, she turned to find her very best friend, Spence, standing above her in the shade of her mother's tree branches. He knelt down beside her and wiped the tears off her rosy cheeks. Don't cry. Everything will be just fine. Don't worry. She pulled him close to her, wrapping her arms around him, crying into his green Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle t-shirt. Do you promise? She whimpered. Spence thought for a moment, trying to find a really great answer. No, I can't predict the future, but I do know that your mom doesn't like you coming here every day to cry. She'd rather see you here dancing and celebrating her new life in heaven. She looked up at him and smiled. That's better. Why don't you show her how good you're getting? She laughed and nodded. Just then, she stood up and began twirling around the willow tree with her hands in the air, her little mermaid skirt waving in the breeze with each spin. They both laughed and fell to the ground, lying with their heads side by side. Hey, look at that one, Spence said, pointing to the cloud shaped like a balloon. Wow, look at that one over there, Evie pointed to a cloud shaped like a sandal. Shoot, she cried. What's wrong? I left my sandals at home again. Spence started laughing. You always leave them at home. You don't like shoes, do you? No, I don't. No, I do. Just not when I run on the beach. But you do that, like every day. They both started laughing. Hey, my mom's making lemonade and brownies. Want to come over? Evie pretended to be thinking, tapping her finger against her chin. Race ya, she exclaimed and jumped to her feet, heading towards his house. Hey, that's not fair. You cheated. Spence chirped, leaping to his feet and following after her. Once both kids reached Spence's porch steps, panting out of breath, Spence slapped her on the back. Doesn't even matter if you cheat. I'm still faster, he laughed. Oh, shut your mouth. Hey, I was thinking, since you always get so sad when you see that tree, maybe we could do something fun there every time you go, and I'll meet you there so you don't have to be alone. Evie smiled and considered the kind thought for a while. Thanks, Spence. That's a great idea, she decided. Hey, maybe we could make a fort there or a tree house. Yeah, let's get to work right after I eat some brownies. Spence laughed and opened the screen door on his porch, leading straight to the kitchen. After their snack and a very lengthy explanation to both of their parents as to why they were borrowing so much wood from their family sheds, the two set out to the willow tree with a wagon carrying the load. Since neither of their parents would let them use power tools or hammers, they had to make do with their natural resources next to the willow tree. This is awesome. I haven't read this in a very long time, guys. About 7 feet away was a large stump about 5 feet tall. They decided to lay their longest wood strip across the willow tree's lowest branch and rest it on top of the large stump. After that, they lined up a combination of branches and wood strips along the long wood strip. Resting them against it and the ground, they tied it off with some rope, making it a bit more sturdy. It wasn't the greatest tree house, but it was a pretty good tree fort. Then they went to work on constructing a door made out of a large slab of bark and gathered up their most prized possessions for decoration. By dinner time, it was complete, and they were both proud of their latest accomplishment and new meeting place. They stood back and nodded in agreement to their tree palace, shaking hands and partying, making their way across the beach to the back porches for dinner. Tomorrow they would enjoy their new clubhouse. Chapter 4, Second Grade. Looking out his window at the beautiful blue lake that extended so far into the distance that it began to blend in with the light blue sky, Spence stretched to greet a new day. He quickly dressed, slipped into the bathroom, and then creaked slowly past his grandma Mindy's room. He thought he had made it success if he thought he had made it successfully, but just when he was about to touch the first step on the stairs, Grandma Mindy's bedroom door flung open. Well, good morning, honey, she chirped. Nice to see you up so early today. Are you on your way to do chores? Watching Spence roll his eyes. Sorry, guys, I'm editing as I go here. Roll his eyes, she continued, pretending as though she didn't see him. Well, that is so sweet of you to help out your parents. You are such a helpful little man, aren't you? I wish I had been so lucky to have such a helpful little man. Back in my working days, she loaded on the guilt real thick. It was her passive form of manipulation. Yes, your mother was pretty helpful, but your uncle didn't help out one bit. He was about your age, and he always had somewhere to be or something to be doing, and it was never helping out his mom and dad, that's for sure. Why? I'm sorry, Grandma, but there are a lot of chores to do around here, and talking isn't getting any of them done, so I better get going. Love you, he called as he raced down the stairs before she told him the story of all the chores she had to do around the house when she was a little girl and how she never got to play unless it was Sunday because that was the Lord's day. Though he very much loved his grandma Mindy, he hated her passive forms of manipulation. However, not as much as he hated chores. He scurried about doing dishes, cutting grass, taking out garbage. Then finally, at about noon, he was about to walk his tired behind across the beach to the tree fort where Evie had been waiting very patiently. Where have you been? She shrieked. I thought we were meeting at 10 a.m., not 12 p.m. What took you so long? She groaned as she tapped her purple Beauty and the Beast watch. I'm sorry, but my grandma Mindy caught me as I was leaving and gave me the whole good little boys do their chores speech. So I had to be a good little boy and do my stupid chores. Evie laughed for a bit and then shrugged it off. That was the thing about Evie. She'd get mad real quick, but she always seemed to get over it at just as quick too. Anyway, I brought us some lunch. I actually didn't get here until like 11 a.m. I had to do chores too, she grinned. Evie's chores were an everyday thing though. There was no getting out of it. Since her mom died, Evie somehow took on all the responsibilities she could. Her dad didn't even ask her to either. At 8 years old, Evie did all the laundry, dishes, vacuuming, dusting, cleaning, cooking, and babysitting that any child has pretty much ever done. Spencer was surprised that her 5-year-old brother Casper didn't call her mommy yet. Fortunately, her dad was an exterior designer who could take his kids along with him to his sites. Otherwise, he mostly just worked at home on his computer. However, Spencer's parents were almost always gone, which is one of the reasons why Grandma Mindy moved in to help out. Together, they owned a successful little home shop. They called it His father was an architect and his mother an interior designer. They were always together and the happiest couple ever. Spence liked to think. They always seemed to feel bad that he was alone a lot, though, which is why he had Grandma and Allie, his trusty golden retriever. Allie went almost everywhere that Spence did. However, today, Allie was hiding. As they ate their lunches, Evie's eyes began to wander, almost in a frenzy. "Where's Allie?" Evie cried. "I just realized that she isn't here." "Yeah, I kind of forgot that I didn't bring her either. I called for her this morning when I was done with my chores, but she never came. I guess I just figured that she didn't want to come." "That's weird. Allie loves coming along with you. She loves playing with us in the fort. What if she's lost?" Suddenly, Spence began to worry. He hadn't even considered the possibility that Allie might be lost or that she might have run away. "Let's go find her when we're done eating," he suggested, trying not to sound worried, though his face told Evie otherwise. After lunch, the two set out on a hunt for Allie, the missing dog. They ran along the beach, calling her name and whistling. The longer they did, the more concerned and pale Spence's freckled face got. They checked everywhere in the house, all the places that Allie had been with both kids, and still no sign of the beloved companion. After 2 hours of failed searching, both kids retreated to Spence's porch steps, resting their sad chins on their knees. Spence practically in tears at the thought of his dog's dead carcass on the side of a road somewhere. Suddenly, his mom's minivan pulled up and a familiar bark beckoned to them from out one of the rolled down windows. Spence and Evie leaped up and sprinted down the driveway to their very missed friend. Both children were knocked to the ground and covered in sloppy wet kisses all over their chubby faces. "See, Spence, told you she'd be all right," Evie belted out, dodging Allie's tongue from entering her mouth and laughing in tears. "Oh, girl, I've missed you. I was so worried that something had happened to you. Don't ever leave without telling me again, okay?" Allie barked, and Spence wrapped his arms around her golden-haired neck. "Did you see my note?" his mother asked. "I left a note on the kitchen table telling you that I was taking Allie to the vet for a checkup and her annual shots. I'm sorry that you didn't see it, sweetie." "No, I didn't look. Thanks for leaving a note, though." Spence crashed his head into the grassy front yard for being so foolish as to not look for a note, which his mother often left for him every day. "Way to go, goober," Evie laughed. She got up and started running down to the beach. "Where are you going?" Spence called after her as he threw a tennis ball to play fetch with Allie. "To eat dinner. It's almost sunset." She waved as she ran down the beach, making quick little footprints in the sand, trailing behind her beneath the pink-orange sky. 5. Third grade. Spence and Allie started making their way down the beach, footprints and paw prints trailing behind their path, with 2 fishing poles in hand. Spence's father had just finished cleaning out the garage and gave them to Spence. He hadn't used them in years and didn't think he would ever again. Spence had fished before, but never with Evie. He knew she had been fishing with her dad before, but it had been a while. He watched Allie splash around in the water, weaving in and out, first getting wet, then shaking off and going back in for more. Just as he looked up for a second towards the willow tree and the fort, he saw something white glowing below the branches. As they grew closer, he could make out the shape of a little girl with curly brown hair floating down her mid-back, wearing a white sundress and twirling around the tree in bare feet. It was the very first time that Spence had thought a girl was pretty. She looked just like an angel. It was then that he realized the girl was Evie. Evie, but she never wore her hair down. It was always in a messy ponytail, and she didn't have a white sundress, did she? Curious, he drifted closer towards her as she danced below the branches. Just then, she noticed him and stopped, walking slowly towards him. They both stopped close enough that when Evie leaned over, her lips were easily able to touch his. It was both of their first kisses. It was wet and tasted sweet, but salty too. After a few seconds, they both realized what had just happened and stepped back from each other. "Did you just kiss me?" Evie asked. Appalled by this response, he wasn't exactly sure how to reply. After all, she had kissed him. "What? No, you kissed me," he shrieked. "I don't remember that. I remember you kissing me," she proposed. "Girls don't kiss boys. First, boys always kiss the girl." Spence couldn't believe what he was hearing. His freckled face beamed red in anger and embarrassment. "I don't care about that. You kissed me." "Well, did you like it?" Spence was stunned with how calm she was being. She was asking him personal and embarrassing questions as if they were nothing, no big deal. This was the first time he had these feelings and had never heard her talk like this or look the way she did before. Though he did very much like the kiss, he didn't know how to respond. "Why is that important?" he shrieked. "You don't just go around kissing people whenever you feel like it. I couldn't tell you, you know." I'm glad my first kiss. Where is it? I'm glad my first kiss was with you. Evie smiled sweetly and sincerely. I didn't mean to scare you. It's just, she bit her lip and started fidgeting, wishing Spence had responded differently than the way he did. Well, I found my mom's old sundress in my dad's closet, and even though it's a little too big, it was the same dress my mom wore the day that she met my dad. I wanted to look like her when you came to meet me, so I could see if you might be the person I marry someday. And when you came here with fishing poles and Allie, well, it was the same way that my dad met my mom. So I decided to kiss you because then I would know if you'd be a good husband someday. Confused and a little ashamed, Spence just smiled. Well, how do we get married? He asked. Evie grinned whimsically. We hold hands and stand under the willow tree, facing the lake, and my mom at the same time. Spence reached out his hand while Evie's smooth flesh slid easily into his firm grasp. Then we say I do and kiss. It seemed so simple, so Spence went along with it. Okay, I do, he smiled. I do too, Evie chimed. Spence leaned forward this time and lightly brushed his lips against Evie's. It wasn't as exciting as the first kiss, but it still tasted just the same. Now what? Spence asked curiously. Evie shrugged her shoulders. Now we're married, I guess. So we play together every day and sleep in the same bed. We also have to get jobs and bring home presents. Maybe later on we can have kids too. And then, after hearing the first part of Evie's lengthy list, Spence began to tune her out. Maybe getting married wasn't the greatest plan at 8 years old. Okay, I changed my mind. Let's not get married, Spence stated matter-of-factly. What? Evie was so confused. But we're already married. You can't say that you changed your mind. She was angry now. Yes, I can. I'm only 8 years old. We're too young to be married. But you already married me. You can't just take it back and pretend like it never happened. The fire in her eyes was enough to make Spence melt. He felt trapped and short of breath. He thought that they were just playing a game, but Evie wasn't playing. She really thought they were married. But I thought we just pretended to get married. After Evie saw how scared Spence was, she decided to change her mind too. I was, she lied. I was just testing you. She smiled and smacked him hard on the shoulder. You're it, she cried, darting down the beach toward her porch. Spence shook his head, still very confused, after her with Allie close to his side. Chapter 6, 4th grade. And that's where it ends, guys. All right, so I hope you enjoyed hearing about, where is it going? Why isn't it closing? Okay, so I hope you enjoyed listening to my story, Footprints Along the Shores of Moonlight Bay. I really enjoyed reading it after like 14 years. So that's it for today, guys. Bye.